Dave Parody here. In this video, I want to show you how to create this visual. This is a goal or target line placed on a bar chart, and that bar chart has ranked data. And so by placing the goal line on the chart, it's very easy to see which of the particular values, in this case POEs, were above the service goal and which were below the service goal. The two at the bottom were below the service goal. This line is not drawn on top. It's part of the chart, and it's important to do that so that when the data changes or even the goal changes, the chart automatically updates. So let me walk you through the steps to create this sort of a chart. We're going to start here on our sheet with our data. So the data table comes in. We've got our POEs sorted alphabetically, and then our goal down at the bottom here. So the first thing we need to do is to set up the data table for our chart. Now this is relatively simple, and I've just used some simple formulas saying here, just reference, and so we take a look at the formula up here, and I'm simply referencing the cell that is in the data table. So nothing really interesting there, except for the fact that we need to make sure the data is sorted, because this is a bar chart, and bar charts typically will show messages that are ranked. So I'm going to go ahead and select the data in my data table that refers to my different POEs. So not the goal or standard here. I want to show just the sorting of just the POEs. So I'm going to go to my data ribbon, and I'm going to go to the sort item here in the data ribbon, and it opens up this sort data dialog box, and it asks me, so how do you want to sort this data? And it automatically says, you know, I think your data has headers, that's why this checkbox is selected here, which it does. So I'm going to sort by on time percentage, and I'm going to say not smallest to largest. No, I want largest to smallest. Then I'll click OK. And instantly my data is sorted in the data table. And you'll notice here, it also sorts it in the chart data table, which is exactly what we need. Now, you'll notice in my chart data table, I have another data series here called Force 0. Force 0 is a data series that needs to be added depending on the data in your data series. In my particular case, all of these values are relatively close to each other. And because of that, a regular bar chart will not start the axis at 0. So when you create the bar chart, it won't be accurately showing the values because the length of the bar is supposed to show the values. So the first thing we do is we set up our chart data table for our bar chart and add the Force 0 data series if we need to. The next step is to set up the data for our goal line. Now, this is going to be a scatter with lines chart type. So we need both X values and Y values to create this chart. You'll notice that I have set the name of the data series here, and it's actually a formula. So what I do is I set it to the formula saying A12, so that is the name goal right here. And that's the name, and then I add a colon on the end. So I use the ampersand sign, which is the text concatenation character in Excel, to add that on. And the reason I'm adding the colon is when we get to the data label, we're going to want to have a colon in there to separate the name goal and the value, but Excel doesn't allow you to pick any character. It only has a limited number. Colon's not one of them. So I added into the name of the data series. Then we have our X and Y values. So my X value here is going to be how far along that horizontal axis is this value. Well, that's the goal. So you'll notice here my formula is just simply the goal number. The Y values, I'm just using 0 and 1 here because I'm going to set the Y axis, the secondary vertical axis, because a bar chart and a scatter with lines can't share the same vertical axis. I'm going to set it from 0 to 1. So by setting the values from 0 to 1, it makes sure that the line is going to completely go from the bottom of the chart to the top of the chart. So we need to set up, second step is to set up our chart data for our goal line. Now we can start creating the chart now that we've got the data table set up. So I'm just going to show you why the force 0 is needed. I'm going to select my data for the bar chart. And if I only select the data for the bars, not the data for the force 0, and then go up to my insert ribbon and go to my regular bar chart here, notice what it does is it has the value starting at 0.8. So the first one, POEB, looks like it's half, maybe less than half of the longest one, which isn't accurate. That's not true. So we need to add that force 0 in order to properly have the length of the bars represent the accurate values that actually are there. So to do this, I could go and select both of them from the start. Or another way is, as I've done this, I realize afterwards, oh, Excel, it did this. By the way, I've got a video on why Excel does this and how to solve it. And I'll link to that up in the top corner there. I can just drag the corner, the lower right-hand corner here over to say, hey, add another data series. And now all of a sudden, because that value is 0 in the first of the force 0 data series, it doesn't show up, but it says, oh, hey, there's a 0 value. I better start the axis at 0. And you'll notice the bars got smaller because there's actually a second bar underneath each of these. So this is where we have to start formatting our bar chart. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move this over a bit, and I'm going to select the bars, and then I'm going to press Control 1 to open up my formatting task menu. So there's a few things that I need to do here in order to get this to look correct. So the first is the series overlap. So the series overlap right now is 0, and that's why the bars are beside each other. I want them on top of each other because the force 0 is 0. It's not showing up anyways. So overlapping is not going to cause a problem from the data perspective. So I can just go in here and type in 100%, hit enter, and now it's where I want. The gap width, I want the bars to be wider, so instead of 182, which is the default, I'm going to type in 50%. Okay, and the bars are nice and wide. Excellent, that's what I want there. Now the next thing you always do in bar charts is to rank them from largest to smallest. So you notice that's not the default in Excel. It's always been that way. It's not going to change. So I'm going to select my axis, my vertical axis here. Again, if the formatting task pane is not open already, you would press Control 1 to open it. And I will go to my axis options. And in the axis options area, I'm going to go down. I'm going to say, put the categories in reverse order. So when I check this box, now it actually flips them and it puts them where I want them to be. So we've got that set. I don't need the grid lines, so I'll get rid of the grid lines. I also don't need the labels for the horizontal axis. I'll select that, and instead of deleting the horizontal axis, what I typically will do is just to set the labels not to appear. It looks exactly the same, but technically that axis is still there, so I can select it if I really need to do that later on. To do the labels, I'm going to go back to my formatting task pane here. And in the labels section, I'm going to say label position. Instead of next to axis, I'm going to say none. And it makes them disappear. So now I've got my bars, I've got the order, I've got them in cleaned up. Now what I need to do is to add data labels onto the end. Now that's relatively easy, but I need to sort of think about this here. So data labels could cover up part of the line. Well, and the line actually needs to be seen on the fill color. So generally what I'm going to suggest here is you select a fill color that is not so dark. If we're going to have a dark line, I don't want a dark color here. So I'm going to set the fill color first in the chart format ribbon here. I'm going to go to the shape fill section. And instead of the dark blue, which is the normal, I'm going to select one of these lighter blues. And it's just going to give it an easier background for that dashed line for our goal. Now I'm going to add the data labels. I'm going to add them on the outside end. And that's relatively simple. I'm going to just use my skittle here to say I want data labels and I want them to be outside the end. So they are placed outside the end, but they're not formatted very well. There are decimals. I want them to be percentages. So that's not a problem. I'll click on my data labels. That opens up the data label formatting task pane. So there's a few things I want to do here. The first is on the label options, I want to set the number. So the number here is the number format. That's what number means here. And you'll notice the default is general. That's why it's decimals. I'm going to select percentage. And I only need one decimal place. I don't need two. So I'll set one decimal place. And that looks a lot better already. Now, because the dashed line might run into some of these labels, that would cause the label to be very difficult to see. So what I'm going to suggest is when you're using a dashed line on a bar chart, you consider having some background to the data labels. So I'm going to fill it with a semi-transparent color, white being the background of the chart, so that's what I'm going to use. So in formatting my data labels, I'm going to go to my little paint can here for my fill in line, and I'm going to go to my fill color, and I'm going to say I want a solid fill color, and the color I want is white, which is the same as the background, and I want the transparency to be, now I find usually the transparency about 20% works well. That's what I have found works fairly well. Now, you look at the chart and you go, Dave, I didn't notice any difference. No, we're not going to notice any difference yet. It's only after the dashed line that you'll see that semi-transparency, because your white background of the data label on a white background of the chart, there's no difference there. So I've added my data labels for my bar chart. My bar chart is looking great. I will probably want to add a title, because that's going to explain why is it that I'm showing you this data. So I'll go ahead and add my chart title, and I can type in my chart title here. 2 POEs did not meet goal last month. Okay, there we go, and I have my title. So I've now added the bar chart. I've got that created. Now, next thing I need to do is to add my goal line to this bar chart. To add the goal line to the bar chart, I need to add another data series. I've selected my chart here, and on the chart design ribbon, there is an item here called Select Data. Now, Select Data, when I click on it, it opens up the Select Data dialog box, but it's not just selecting data, it's allowing you to add another data series, which is exactly what we're going to do. I have my 2 here, my on-time percent and my force 0, so I'm going to say Add. And then it's going to ask me where's the series name and what are the series values. I'm going to get out of my zoom level here. So the series name, I'm just going to select my cell that has that series name. And remember, I added the colon on so that I have the series name as I want it to be. And then I'm going to select the series values. Now, for the series values, I'm going to suggest anytime it has something filled in there, highlight it, delete it first before you select anything in the worksheet. It just makes it a whole lot easier. So I'm going to select the Y values. Now you might be wondering, why do I select the Y values? It'll become apparent in just a sec. So I'm going to select those and I'm going to click OK. Now I've added this new data series, but you'll notice it kind of just overlaps and something's odd here. Well, that's because it doesn't know what type of data series it's supposed to be, what type of chart. So I'm going to right click on the bars here, and I'm going to say this item here that says change series chart type. That opens up the combination dialog box. You can see it says custom combination, and down here I can select what type of data series this particular, what type of chart each data series is. I'm going to leave those as the bars for the on-time percentage and force 0. The goal, I'm going to select it from the list, and I'm going to have to scroll down on my list here till I get to the scatter, and I'm going to select this one here, scatter with straight lines. What this does is it gives me the ability to draw a line between 2 individual points, which is what I'm wanting to do. I'm going to select that, and now I'm going to click OK, and you'll notice that, oh, it's added a weird line. Why is that in that spot? That looks odd. Well, because it doesn't know what the X values are supposed to be, because it didn't allow me to select that yet. So I'll go back and I'll select any of my data series and go back to my select data dialog, which we before. And now when I go to my goal, I'm going to select that one and I say edit. Notice now it's asking me, oh, okay, so this has X and Y. Where are the X values? Now I can select those X values. So I'll click into that field and I'll say my X values are here, 91.5. Aha, now this is starting to look more like what I want. Now, the problem here is that the line doesn't go all the way to the top because this secondary vertical axis, notice the maximum is 1.2. I want it to be 1. So I'm going to select that secondary vertical axis and go over to my task pane here that allows me to format the axis, and I'll go to the axis options and I'll set the maximum from the default, which is 1.2, to 1. And when I set that, now the line goes all the way from below the lowest to above the top bar. Exactly what I want. Now again, I don't need the labels here for this particular axis, so I'll go down to the labels just like we did for the other axis and say the position is none. So now I've got rid of those. I just need to format this particular line. And the formatting of the line, I like it to be maybe not black, maybe it'll be a dark gray and dashed so it is visually different. And I can do that on my chart format ribbon with my shape outline. When I go to the shape outline here, I'll drop this down and I'll select maybe this dark gray, and then I will select the weight. Now the default weight is in my mind too thick, so I usually make it not quite so thick, maybe 1.5. Maybe that's even a little thicker than I want it to be, but you can choose that yourself. I'm going to leave it at 1.5, and then I'm going to use the dashes to say I want the small dashes to be there. And now notice I have my dash line, and I want to just note here the two values at the bottom. You'll notice how the semi-transparent fill behind those data labels now is really making itself known. You can still see that dashed line a little bit behind it, but you can easier read those values, and that's why I had that semi-transparent fill color there. Last thing I need to do is to add my data label to the top data point. So I select both data points. I'm going to select just the top data point, and I'm going to add my data label. So I'll use my Skittle, data labels, and I'll go to more options because I'm having a very customized type of a label here. So I'm going to go to more options, and in my label options, I'm going to say I want the series name, I want the X value, which is the percentage. I don't want the Y value, so I'll uncheck that. And then the separator, you'll notice I only have limited choices here. Colon's not one of them, so I'll just use a space. And now I have goal, colon, space, 91.5%. I'm going to put it above, position-wise. And then I'm going to do the same thing I did for the percentages before, is just set the number to be the percentage format and only one decimal place. Now what I've done is I've created that goal line in the correct position, and it's driven by the data. So if the data ever changes, the goal line, the position of the goal line will change as well. If the data updates next month for the performance of each of these POEs, it will automatically update. And that's the great thing about building this in as part of your chart. It makes it so much better. Now you might be wondering, why am I showing you this with a fairly complicated, seemingly complicated X, Y, the scatter with lines? Why am I doing that? Because the value is not in necessarily creating this chart, but learning techniques like I teach in my financial viz courses to my clients, learning techniques that you can leverage and take further. So for example, you can use this technique that I've just shown you to create this chart to create something like this, where you actually have the difference between the top bar and the bottom bar labeled, shown with a line, all automatically updating when the data changes. So leverage these techniques that you can learn in Excel to create even more effective visuals in the future. And that's what I teach in my financial viz courses, how you can select the right visuals and create those visuals in the tool you already have, Excel. Just because you're using Excel doesn't mean you can't have effective visuals. You can have very effective visuals, like this one, where we have a dashed line that shows a goal or a target on a bar chart, and it makes that message very clear.
If you found this video helpful, there are 3 things you can do to help me out. First, click the like button below the video on YouTube. Second, leave a comment with any questions or feedback. And third, subscribe to my channel. Check out my websites and other videos with more tips and advice. Thanks again for watching.